Hey Nathan, how are you?
Great, Amanda. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Okay, great. We got that out of the way.
Okay.
Are you ready to talk about working in SaaS? There's so many ways that we can talk about SaaS. It's like, how does this work and how does that work?
Yeah, it's a pretty big area. So where should we start?
Did I say anything just now that piqued your interest?
Yeah. No. Okay. Sorry. Let's go again.
Well, let's start out by defining SaaS. How would you define it?
SaaS is software that you rent rather than buy, right? In the very old days, you would go and buy CD-ROMs or DVDs of software and you would buy your copy of Photoshop or QuickBooks or whatever for the year. And then they would introduce another one the next year, which you wouldn't have to necessarily upgrade to unless you wanted to go to the store again and get the new version that had the features. And SaaS kind of changed that. 37 Signals launched Basecamp, project management software. That was like one of the first major SaaS applications that really took off. So now there's tons of them, but that changed the model to say instead of buying the software for $400 a year when you choose to, instead it'll be $49 a month, and you pay every month. If you stop paying, it goes away. As long as you pay your subscription, you get access to it, and it's going to get updated constantly. Some of it, I think, was pushed because of the change of development style, right? Like with CD-ROMs and DVDs and physical boxes, you can really only afford to do a new version every year just through the supply chain of distribution. But with web software, you can push a new version every hour, right? And there could be a tiny little improvements. And so SaaS, I think, was the natural evolution of that.
That just brought me back to my childhood where, like, yeah, you would get the little CD-ROMs and it would be like Windows 98. I hope that was a year that there was one, but you get like
Right.
Windows 98 and that would be like, you'd have to download it. And I remember like there were all those like issues with licensing and like how many times it was downloaded.
Yeah. And there was also a period where they would do that, but computers weren't ubiquitously internet connected. So they would have license keys that were just like mysterious numbers, but they didn't actually go and check against the internet. So then license keys would get shared around. And yes, it was a very weird, a weird transition.
Now you're making me want to have this conversation with my mom because she worked in IT her whole career. She's like, I was a woman in IT in the 80s, which
Sure.
it is cool. I can't tell you how many times she's jerry rigged systems around the way software used to be implemented. She's like the old school, like 80s, 90s, like kind of IT workaround, like sneaky type lady. But I think SaaS is it's just this whole new wave of doing things. And it's so different from how it used to function before.
Yeah. And some people really don't like it. I think there's a lot of positives and admittedly negatives of it, right? Like people don't like the idea of a subscription, even if they would have spent that same amount of money anyway. They liked buying Photoshop 3 and then deciding for themselves, like whether they were going to buy Photoshop 4 or whether they're just going to skip a year and wait until Photoshop 5. And it was a big investment. Like you would go and buy it. It came with a huge book and like, 8 CDs and clip art and all this stuff. And it was like $700 in the 90s. So a lot of money. But then you could wait and that's gone. And so people feel like there's a lot of fatigue around having a million subscriptions and like I don't own any of it. And if I stop paying, it goes away. Even on the consumer side, right? Like I think people don't like having to pay for Spotify every month, but I I spent like, 15 US dollars in 1990 on CDs. Like one CD I would save up. And now for like less than that, way less than that with inflation, like you can have every song in the world. And I certainly spent more than $15 a month through my, years in high school on music. And this is just a totally different model.
Yeah. But with music to that point, like you're not just paying for those songs. You own that CD and there's a picture of the artist on the cover and it's like a physical thing that you can like hold and load into your CD player and then you pull out the the cover leaflet and you can like sing along because all the lyrics are printed in there. I know they do the lyrics on Spotify now, but I'm like, it is something that is interesting when you think about the way software has changed, almost like the groundedness of a product.
Yeah. I mean, with music, I think it's changed it, but what you're describing is a very like physical, human, like, oh, I have this thing. I have a box up in the corner of my closet that has my like 300 CDs that I bought through middle school and high school that I will not let my wife throw away. I've moved it 3 or 4 times across the last 8 years. I've opened it 0 times.
At first, I thought you were gonna say you moved to the box like 3 times to keep hiding it from your wife, and I was like, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Like, she keeps trying to throw out your CDs, and you keep, like, re-hiding the box somewhere else in the home, and then I was like, "Oh, no, you're moving it from place to place."
I have no CD player anywhere in my house except an old PlayStation that is unplugged. I could theoretically play it through my TV, which would be super weird and terrible. Um, Even my cars don't have a CD player. Like no computer has a CD player. Like I can't actually play this CD. When it was starting to change, I was like, oh, I'm never getting rid of my CDs. I ripped them all into iTunes. I had every song you would put your CD into, and you could basically throw the CD away, but I would keep it. I'm like, oh, I'm never getting rid of these. But it doesn't actually serve a super useful purpose.
I mean, you never know. Like, records made a comeback. I mean, those are it's well, I'm
That's even
saying
more
I'm
tactile. That's an entirely
yeah,
physical
because
part.
it's mechanical, right? Like, it's not even being read digitally. Well, is how do records work? It's being read mechanically, right? Because it has the little
Mechanically,
arm.
yeah. Yeah.
Ugh. Okay. But I hear you, like, look, this is I mean, it's a little messy looking, but I have all my books and I have been gifted a Kindle before. I don't want it. And someone's like, "Yes, but you could have all of that live in something this big
Yeah.
and it wouldn't get, destroyed when you drop it into the ocean when you're at the beach." And well, no, a Kindle would get destroyed if you dropped it into the ocean. But you know what I mean? You put in a plastic bag and still use it and read it and well, whatever.
I think people have preferences and people are kind of stuck in like they like something at one point and then they don't want to change, right? Like they like that experience, they want to have it. And I think there's also positives to some of these changes. Like
I was gonna ask, it's the same way that some people have preferences when it comes to books, right? Like some people are like, "Oh, I have my Kindle. I love my Kindle." That's my entire family.
the
I'm like, "I love my books. Do you wanna borrow this paperback?" I'll like bring it home. I'll like deliver it to my mom or to my one of my sisters, and I'll see it sitting on their desk weeks later. And I'm like, "Oh, you didn't wanna read it?" And they're like, "Oh, I just downloaded it on my Kindle." Like I'm halfway through.
I read books in a way I would have never imagined before. Like I'll download it on Kindle and on Audible and they sync between each other so I can like in bed read at night and then when I'm like driving my daughter to school, I can pick up on Audible and it knows exactly where I am and then I can park the car and come inside and then that night in bed again, I'm like at that new point in the book on the Kindle. And so like there's entirely new experiences and I can read through books much faster that way than I ever could have before. But with music, like I have had this very tortured resistance and um, I still have my CDs in the closet and I just listen to Spotify, but like Spotify is really good at like helping you discover new music and they have their like release radar when things are coming out and they have, your personalized playlist in the algorithm because it has introduced me to music that I didn't think I was going to listen to. And then the Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year is like a whole experience to like see your most played songs. And I have like that, like those are all cool things that never would have been possible and like never would have like happened incrementally, right? Like there's no path for like going from a CD to any of those things easily. It takes an entirely new kind of medium and paradigm to make that possible. And then all this new stuff happens that you would have never had otherwise.
Yeah. I would like to call out that now that's what I call music, did attempt to do that, not just one artist per CD. I do think they deserve some credit for that.
Yeah, but it wasn't personalized. I never liked Now That's When
No,
I Call Music. Like,
no.
like it was the national like compilation of it was not anyone's favorite CD, I would say.
If that was your favorite CD, you are a serial killer, probably.
Good thing we're talking about SaaS.
Oh, we could go in either direction in all of these industries, but with SaaS as well, sort of this change to a subscription-based model has really democratized the space, right? Like you used to have Microsoft and everyone ran on Microsoft and everyone was buying the Microsoft CDs and they just had the biggest market share and the best distribution. And that's just what everyone was using. And so whatever Microsoft put out, people were like, well, that integrates with my other stuff. And so I'll just buy the next thing that they put out. But what I think is interesting, it's like now there's this shift and it's kind of it's come when you think about it, like really quickly in the grand scheme of things, this shift into, you know, being able to use different products, those products having open APIs and people being able to self integrate things with each other, the internet and just like globalization. This is too many thoughts all in one, but please do something with that.
Some people have very polarizing thoughts about globalization and also Spotify and artists and all that. The internet is responsible, I think, for the opening and broadening. I don't know that it's SaaS specifically, but I think one thing that's definitely happened has been the SaaS model of like renting and monthly subscriptions opens a consistent business format where the business can continue to invest larger amounts of money and make there's a predictability in the SaaS revenue on the business side that then they can staff around and they can really build up. It's less of these spurts of effort, right? Like, let's get a whole team together. We're building Photoshop 3, right? And then it's a big long project. And then at the end, it's like you're making a movie. And at the end of the movie, you're like, it's filmed, it's edited, it's out in theaters, and like, we're done. And like, we'll decide if we're doing a sequel, but like all those people are going to go find other work. They're going to get reallocated to other projects. And then maybe we'll do this whole thing again in a year, like depending on who's available. Right. So that cycle was how software used to work out of necessity. But now you have SaaS, which is like monthly or annual subscriptions. And so the company knows how much money is coming in every month. They don't have to wonder whether, Amanda's going to go buy Photoshop 4. Like, they know that she probably needs it next month if she had it this month. It's much more predictable. And so the same team can stay allocated and focused on solving one particular problem for customers. And they can just get better and better. And you don't have those like huge spurts of energy. And then the drop off is like, they know they can't sell a new version like immediately thereafter. So I think there's a lot of benefit to the software and it gets away from some of the feature bloat that used to get into desktop software, right? Like, because every year is like, how are you going to make Microsoft Word more exciting than last year? Like, well, we got to say we added 16 new features that like nobody cares about, nobody's asked for, nobody wants, nobody will ever use, but they're on the checklist. And so buy the new version for this year. Um, and
Instead of just Clippy, you can choose to have the dog or the cat.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so
Like nobody asked for that, I'm pretty sure.
marketing and software like will always be a tricky area, but like with SaaS, it can be much more straightforward. On the business side, you can really invest in things that are going to make the customer's experience better because instead of trying to kind of trick them into buying the new version, all you have to do is continue to make the product good and better enough for them to keep, right? Like, you just have to decide, am I going to pay next month like for this thing? Like, did I get enough value out of it? Has it made my life better enough this month to do that?
Is there ever a point where a product is just good enough, no changes needed? Or do you think that's an impossible point to reach?
No, there is a definite point where you reach, it is good enough. Yeah. Like Microsoft Word might have been there after a couple versions. Like that pressure to keep shipping a new version really contributed to the feature bloat. You might have that a little bit in SaaS as well. And that's where the subscription fatigue really gets frustrating for customers. It's like a product can be pretty close to done. It can do the job that somebody needs done quite well. But there's a lot of ways to improve software. You could improve software by just making it faster. You Teams can spend a lot more time on the onboarding and just making sure that setting up and getting started and becoming successful is easier. There's integrations with other tools, like to import things or to export things. Like there's always a way that you can improve the software. If you are not noticeably improving the product for the people that are using it, you're probably not going to be able to increase prices consistently.
How are you assessing the value for the SaaS that you subscribe to?
I mean, what's my alternative? Pay for an uptime monitor to like make sure our websites are online. And what's my alternative? Like I frantically check every minute of the day to see if my website is online, and like when I'm standing in line for places, and when I'm, before I go to bed at night, and first thing when I wake up is my website online. Like, of course, that's crazy and would take a lot of time, and still wouldn't be as good as a tool that checks every 5 minutes. And I pay, I don't know, $10 a month for 20 websites that it checks or something. I mean, there's no calculus to do because it's so cheap compared to the alternative, me doing it manually, so much better. I don't evaluate that every month about whether I'm going to continue. As long as it continues to work, that's a product that hasn't gotten a whole lot better, since I signed up a few years ago, but it also doesn't bother me because it's just something that is running and doing its job all the time. I don't have to think about it. That's good enough. Some products at that point where they're just good enough, they're great. They do their job reliably 100% of the time. They don't frustrate you. They don't get in your way. And you never have to think about them. And that's just fine. And people will pay for that every month.
I want to go back to a thought I had before because you're very people focused. You care a lot about your team, and a lot of your team are developers, and they're building SaaS. And you had mentioned earlier about how the way that SaaS operates, there's all of these like constant continual improvements that you can make to the product, which to your point has positives and negatives. Positives being people are kind of in the work and they're not taking long extended breaks. I don't want to equate it to reality TV, but it's just like you're just constantly like filming and putting out episodes, right? They're coming, it's just constant improvement. So from a people perspective, have you found the amount of work or the stress of work shifting at all as we've transitioned into SaaS? Like, how is that different for engineers and developers?
In my agency days before I was doing SaaS and software products, it was great because I got to learn a lot of new technology stacks, and I would, try a bunch of different things, and I would build something up, and I would educate the client, and we would, build a system. But a lot of times, they might run out of budget, or the political winds would change within the business, right? And then in some way or another, the project would end, or we achieved the original goal, but they wouldn't approve the follow-on work. Like the project would end and then start over from scratch again and start over from scratch again. And like I ended up building a lot of similar systems and things I was proud of and that did very well, in their objectives and would run at scale. But I didn't get to work on the same thing for very long, very often. A lot of them were 3-month projects, 6-month projects, maybe a client that we worked on with for a few years off and on, with a movie, with like any kind of live event or something, right? Like there's a crunch, there's a push, and it's like at a certain point, there's like 24 hours left, and it's going to be what it's going to be. We got to get this out the door. And that pressure can force a lot of creativity, and like great things still come out. But at a certain point, you start taking shortcuts because you're out of time, out of budget. There's a lot of value and energy and excitement around building something really grand and large over time. So I think it's a much more consistent and manageable pace, more like a marathon than a sprint. Some of the products we're working on now, one's about to turn 10 years old. Like, you get to work on the same thing and you can really improve and craft it. And the quality and the details that you never would be able to otherwise if it was a one-time effort, right? Like it goes through waves, right? I think it's much more energizing to work on something and see how far it's come. So by working on a big product, like you get to work on all sorts of things about product and design and how is this going to be such a good product that someone who's never talked to us before can just click sign up, put their credit card in and like figure it out without any hand holding. Like that's a tremendous challenge. And then as the product grows and then all of a sudden we have, you know, thousands of people using it for very complex scenarios, like the scalability challenges of the servers and like how do we make this thing still perform quickly? Like that's a whole new set of challenges. So for developers, I think I've had a much better experience working on products than I did in client services.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I didn't know any of that. Like, I like knowing stuff, and now I know more stuff.
Eventually figured out that you just like asking questions and hearing the answer.
I'm a nosy person, but I'm not nosy with any nefarious intent. Like, I just like knowing stuff. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. It took me a little to get that, and I was just like, I thought you were like trying to figure something else out, and I was just trying to understand what it was. But eventually, I
Nope.
realized there was nothing else. It was just
There's
curiosity.
there's nothing going on behind the eyes here. It's
Yep. No,
just
there's plenty. It's just there's no ulterior motive. It's just curiosity. Yeah.
do you have any sponsors for us today?
I know. I never have any sponsors.
You don't have any sponsors?
Nope.
Well, how are we paying for this podcast then?
I really don't know.